Welcome to Dungeon Academics. My name is Thomas and I will be your instructor. This is the first of a series of very different videos that necessity has forced upon me. My computer has died after 9 years of use, so I am unable to use anything more advanced than an iPhone. This means if I want to make any content, which I do, it needs to be unedited, unscripted. It will have no charts, it will have no graphs, no graphics, and it will just be discussion. So that's what I will do. I've decided to make a series independent of my other work, considering the future of Dungeons & Dragons. We've recently had the release of the 2024 version of 5th edition, and there are mixed results. A lot of the stuff in the new game I like a lot. A lot of the stuff is very similar to 5th edition, and as a result, some of the weaknesses of the game have persisted through. Whether this will be as successful as the 2014 version, only time will tell. I know a lot of content creators are still making material that's compatible for the 2014 version, or both, but we'll see what happens with the 2024 and its adoption rates over the next few years. But let's look beyond that. Let's look at 6th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Let's live in a world where this happens, where Wizards of the Coast, or whoever owns the Dungeons & Dragons IP in 10 years' time, who knows where that will go, has decided to release a new game. An entirely new game, a grounds-up rewrite. Is that even possible? Well, yes, this is something that Games Workshop does with its Warhammer and Warhammer 40,000 franchises on a relatively frequent basis. There have been multiple editions of the game, and some of them have been ground-up rewrites. I am old enough to have played 1st edition Warhammer 40,000, or Rogue Trader as it was often called, and I was in the hobby when 2nd edition Warhammer 40,000 was released. This was a completely new game. All of the rules were put aside and rewritten from zero. Most of the models and armies were still useful in a way, though over time a lot were phased out. And then in 1998, the 3rd edition of Warhammer 40,000 came out, and that was also a ground-up rewrite. 4th, 5th, and 6th editions were more similar, iterative improvements on an existing game, but since then the game has been reset and started again from scratch. It is not necessarily bad for a hobby to do this every once in a while. So let's assume that 6th edition will be a rewrite. Would I like to write it? Well, yes, I certainly would. So if anyone out there is involved in that, you let me know and I will be on your team. Anyway, the first thing to consider is, what are the sacred cows of Dungeons & Dragons? What makes Dungeons & Dragons Dungeons & Dragons? Is it merely a game set in the world of Dungeons & Dragons? A lot of people are very familiar with the Forgotten Realms and Faerun, with Waterdeep and Baldur's Gate. But not all Dungeons & Dragons is set there. You consider the other settings. There's Barovia, which is in its own pocket dimension. There's Spelljammer. There's Dragonlance. Dungeons & Dragons has a lot of dimension hopping and multiverse shenanigans in it. So being set in this familiar location isn't what makes D&D D&D. Though I think the Forgotten Realms and Faerun are an important place to start, because they are so accessible and they are familiar to people who have never played Dungeons & Dragons before. People understand elves and dwarves and orcs and goblins and dragons. They have this cultural memory of what Dungeons & Dragons is based on, and that makes the game very accessible, and that is a good thing. Mechanically, is there anything that is vital for Dungeons & Dragons to be Dungeons & Dragons? Is it a D20 based system? Well, not always. First edition Dungeons and Dragons wasn't strictly based on the D20, though by Advanced Dungeons and Dragons this was the case. Have wizards always used spell slots? No, that's an invention of 3rd edition. Other magic tracking systems have existed in the D&D game. What about the 6 ability scores? Strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. Well, yes, they have always been part of the game, as have classes, though what those classes are and how they work have changed significantly over time. So if we wanted to make a ground-up rewrite of Dungeons & Dragons, what should we keep and what could we perhaps change? What are these sacred cows that must be preserved? And what can be ground up and turned into a very tasty hamburger? I don't know. This is something that I have thought about on a big scale. I think the class system of Dungeons and Dragons, I'm a level 5 fighter, I'm a level 8 wizard. I think that is a core part of the Dungeons and Dragons experience. I don't necessarily like the way it's been handled in 5th edition. I think the leveling up an entire class in one step makes the character progression system a little clunky, but I wouldn't want to get rid of this class and level system. Would I keep the D20 system? Probably yes. It's so familiar and so iconic over many, many years that its recognizability is an important part of the appeal of Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons has always been an accessible and easy to get into roleplay game, at least over the last 10 years. And I don't think changing that's a good idea. So keeping the D20 system is good, but the experimentation with bounded accuracy has shown that it has weaknesses that need to be resolved. There is a lot to change in Dungeons and Dragons, but there's also so much good stuff that you would want to keep. So I'm going to end this video with a question. What makes Dungeons and Dragons a game in your mind? Beyond the setting, what mechanics of Dungeons and Dragons are important to you? What would you want to see kept? And what would you want to see changed? Having played a large range of roleplay games, what other ideas do you think can be brought into Dungeons and Dragons that would improve the game without making it feel less or too different from what it is? Because I think at heart, most role players agree that Dungeons and Dragons is special. It is worth keeping in a recognizable form. It is worth developing. It is worth advancing so that players for decades to come will have this wonderful game that they can play. So, what makes the game itself? What are the core components of the rules that make Dungeons and Dragons uniquely Dungeons and Dragons? Have a think about that. Please let me know in the comment section your thoughts. What should be kept? What should be changed? And what are you not sure about? And whatever your next game is, enjoy it. Have fun. Thank you for putting up with me. And when I get a new bit of hardware for my computer, I'll try and go back to the more managed, polished games. But for now, this is what you're getting. I hope it's okay with you.